Patrick Mahomes, the face of the NFL. A superstar built on highlights, trophies, and a dynasty. But what if the story you've been told isn't the full truth? Because behind the success, there's pressure, doubt, and moments the league doesn't focus on. This is the untold story of Patrick Mahomes. And what's hidden might change everything. Before Patrick Mahomes became the face of the NFL, before the MVP awards and Super Bowl victories, his story was far from certain. In fact, it began with doubt. Real, loud, and widespread doubt. Coming out of Texas Tech, Mahomes was one of the most exciting quarterbacks in college football, but excitement doesn't always translate to trust at the professional level. His numbers were impressive, even explosive, but many analysts questioned the system he played in. Texas Tech ran a pass-heavy offense that inflated quarterback statistics, and critics argued that Mahomes was a product of that system rather than a generational talent. To them, his success didn't guarantee anything at the next level. Then there was his playing style. Mahomes didn't look like a traditional quarterback. His mechanics were unconventional, his footwork inconsistent, and his decision-making often labeled as risky. He would attempt throws that most quarterbacks wouldn't even consider, deep passes across his body, off-balance releases, and improvised plays under pressure. While those moments created highlights, they also raised concerns. NFL teams value control, structure, and predictability. Mahomes represented the opposite. He was creative, aggressive, and unpredictable. For some coaches, that wasn't exciting, it was dangerous. As the 2017 NFL Draft approached, the conversation around Mahomes became increasingly divided. Some scouts saw rare talent, a player capable of changing the game. Others saw a project, someone who would require years of development and might never fully adapt. And then came draft night. One by one, teams made their selections, and Mahomes kept falling. It wasn't because he lacked ability. It was because teams weren't ready to take the risk. They chose safer options, more polished prospects, players who fit the traditional mold. That moment revealed something important. Mahomes was not the obvious choice. He wasn't the guaranteed star people now believe he was. He was uncertainty. This part of his journey is often overlooked because it doesn't match the current narrative. Today, he is seen as inevitable, as if his greatness was always destined. But the reality is very different. Mahomes entered the NFL with questions surrounding him, doubts about his style, and skepticism about his future. He wasn't handed the label of future legend. He had to grow into it. And that makes his story more complex than it appears. When the Kansas City Chiefs decided to trade up in the 2017 NFL Draft to select Patrick Mahomes, it wasn't a move that everyone understood. In fact, many questioned it immediately. The Chiefs were not a struggling team in desperate need of a quarterback. They already had Alex Smith, a reliable and efficient leader who had guided them to consistent success. From the outside, the decision didn't seem logical. Why invest so heavily in an unproven, risky prospect when stability was already in place? But inside the organization, the perspective was different. The Chiefs weren't looking at what they had. They were thinking about what they could become. They saw in Mahomes something that went beyond traditional evaluation metrics. It wasn't just his arm strength, which was extraordinary. It wasn't just his ability to improvise. It was the way he saw the field, the confidence he carried, and the belief that he could execute plays others wouldn't even attempt. Still, belief doesn't remove risk. Trading up meant giving up valuable assets. It meant committing to a player who might not succeed. If Mahomes failed, the decision wouldn't just be criticized. It could set the franchise back for years. That's what made it a gamble. Instead of rushing him into action, the Chiefs made another critical decision: patience. Mahomes spent his entire rookie season on the bench, watching Alex Smith, learning the system, and adjusting to the speed of the NFL. This period didn't generate headlines. There were no viral highlights, no MVP conversations. But it was one of the most important phases of his career. Behind the scenes, Mahomes was developing. He studied defensive schemes, learned how to read complex coverages, and refined his mechanics. He began to understand when to take risks and when to avoid them. This was the transformation from raw talent to controlled playmaker. By the time his opportunity came, Mahomes was no longer just a risky prospect. He had become a quarterback prepared to lead at the highest level. And when he finally stepped onto the field, the impact was immediate. When Patrick Mahomes became the starting quarterback for the Kansas City Chiefs, there were expectations, but no one predicted what would happen next. His first full season wasn't just impressive, it was historic. Mahomes threw for 50 touchdowns, a milestone reached by only a select few in NFL history, and earned the league's MVP award. But numbers alone don't tell the full story. What made Mahomes different was how he played the game. He brought a style that felt completely new. Traditional quarterback rules seemed optional to him. He could throw accurately from impossible angles, deliver passes without looking at his target, and extend plays far beyond their expected limits. Defenses struggled to adjust. Strategies that worked against other quarterbacks failed against him. Mahomes wasn't just reacting, he was creating. Every game felt unpredictable. Every play carried the possibility of something extraordinary. Fans were captivated. Analysts tried to break it down, to explain how it was possible, but Mahomes kept pushing the boundaries. He wasn't just succeeding within the system, he was redefining it. Then came the playoffs. High-pressure situations often expose weaknesses, but for Mahomes, they became opportunities. He demonstrated composure, resilience, and the ability to deliver when it mattered most. That journey eventually led to a Super Bowl victory, solidifying his status as one of the league's elite players. In a remarkably short time, Mahomes transitioned from a question prospect to the face of the NFL. But rapid success brings a different kind of challenge. When you rise that quickly, expectations don't just increase, they explode. Suddenly, greatness isn't surprising anymore. It's expected, and that shift changes everything. Success at the highest level of professional sports comes with a cost, and for Patrick Mahomes, that cost is pressure, constant, intense, and unavoidable. Once he established himself as the face of the NFL, the expectations surrounding him changed dramatically. Winning was no longer enough. Now, it had to be consistent, dominant, repeated. Every season began with the same assumption. The Chiefs were Super Bowl contenders, and anything less would be seen as a disappointment. That kind of expectation creates a different environment, one where every performance is analyzed in detail. A single mistake becomes a headline. A single loss raises questions. Opposing teams began to prepare for Mahomes differently. Defensive coordinators studied his tendencies, designed strategies specifically to limit his strengths, and forced him into situations where improvisation became more difficult. The element of surprise that once defined his playstyle started to fade. At the same time, the dynamics within the team began to evolve. Players changed, roles shifted, and maintaining the same level of chemistry became more challenging. Success often leads to movement, contracts, trades, and new additions, all of which impact consistency. Despite all of this, Mahomes continued to perform at an elite level. But the reality behind those performances wasn't always visible. The highlights showed incredible throws and game-winning drives. What they didn't show was the preparation, the adjustments, and the mental strain of meeting expectations that never decrease. This is the side of greatness that often goes unnoticed. And it's where the real challenge begins. Building a championship team is one of the hardest achievements in sports, but sustaining that success over time is even more difficult. For Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs, the idea of a dynasty brings both recognition and pressure. From the outside, a dynasty appears dominant and stable, but internally, it requires constant adaptation. Every season introduces new challenges. Opponents become more familiar with your strategies. They study past games, identify patterns, and look for weaknesses. What once worked easily now requires adjustment. At the same time, roster changes are inevitable. Key players leave, new ones arrive, and maintaining the same level of chemistry becomes a complex process. Even small changes can have a significant impact on performance. For Mahomes, this means evolving continuously. He is no longer the unexpected force that surprised the league. He is the standard that others are trying to reach and surpass. There have been moments where the offense hasn't looked as fluid, where timing has been slightly off, where the rhythm that once felt effortless required more effort. These moments are not failures, but they are reminders. They show that even at the highest level, consistency is not guaranteed. And that's the reality the NFL doesn't always emphasize, because it shifts the narrative from dominance to challenge, from certainty to uncertainty. Patrick Mahomes has already achieved what many players spend entire careers chasing: MVP awards, Super Bowl victories, and a reputation as one of the most talented quarterbacks in the history of the game have firmly established his place in the NFL. But legacy is not defined by what has already happened. It is defined by what comes next. As Mahomes continues his career, the focus shifts from potential to longevity. The question is no longer whether he can reach greatness. It's whether he can sustain it. The NFL is constantly evolving. New players emerge, new strategies develop, and competition intensifies. Staying at the top requires continuous adaptation, both physically and mentally. For Mahomes, this means refining his game, adjusting to defensive strategies, and maintaining leadership within a changing team environment. It also means handling expectations that never diminish. Every season adds to his story. Every performance contributes to how he will be remembered. Will he continue to lead a dominant era? Will he redefine what long-term success looks like? Or will the challenges of sustaining greatness reshape his journey? These are the questions that make this phase of his career so compelling. Because while his achievements are already historic, his story is still unfolding. And what happens next may ultimately define everything.